I sat in a good spot. The camera.
Alrighty. Call to order the Friday, February 16th, 2024 meeting of the Budget, Finance and Growth Committee. Want to again start out in true fashion of our past chair, now President Bolton, by having everyone introduce themselves really quickly, and then Rob will give us the instructions for how to participate in the hearing of the public. So we'll start right here.
Phyllis Davis, the board administrator.
Cody Hutchins, contract analyst.
Nan Haygood, manager of state and federal programs.
Michael Gustin, assistant treasurer.
Kevin Ashley, director of financial reporting and transparency.
Dr. Moffitt, board member.
Brandon Craig, board member.
Andy, board member.
Dan Hoying, general counsel.
Emily Bell, ASME Local 232.
Lauren Roberts, chief audit executive.
And then Rob, if you want to give the as President Bolton would always say, if you want to do the do.
Good morning. If you'd like to speak today during the speaking to the public, please click the raise the hand icon and we will ask you your name and association to the district and we will bring you over to speak during the speaking to the public. We ask that you unmute your camera and your microphone when you speak so the panelists and the public can see and hear you. Thank you.
Alrighty. And I just want to give some little bit of housekeeping just because we've made some changes since in this year really, where we've moved from Blue Jeans to Zoom. But then, so we have our treasurer who will be on or is joining us here in just a moment. But just to make sure for everybody is speaking to the mics very clearly so that everyone can hear. Additionally, just made some slight edits to how we are doing our agenda. So if you'll notice on the agenda, we have some of the old business or stuff that we need to either approve or push out from a committee aspects. And then new business is all the new information that we will be receiving each month. So Rob, do we have Jen on?
Yeah, we're working on it now, not as of yet.
Okay. We'll get started here and then I will certainly have Jen join in. So maybe we'll do a skip at least the first item and move to the policies for approval. These are all policies that we should have been familiar with. I know, of course, board member Lindy was not on the committee last year, but I think these are also that have come before, these two policies came before the general board as well. So take away, Mr.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Craig. So just high level, two policies we're looking at. One is around gifts and donations, just kind of the higher level, just kind of clarifying some things as far as people want to give donations to CPS and how that works. The second one is a subset of that, which is the crowdfunding, crowdsourcing stuff. So for those of you who might not be familiar, there are a lot of kind of applications out there that allow a teacher to go out and start a campaign and say, hey, I want to get something for my classroom. People contribute, once that threshold is raised, that item gets delivered. We don't really have a lot of insight into that now without a policy. So there's a lot going on. We do get some reports. Donors Choose is probably the biggest of those groups. And so we do get some reports from them, but we would like a policy so to kind of coordinate things. I think, like I said, this has been reviewed a couple times. So I think I'll just take questions if anyone has questions.
Thanks, Brennan. Thank you for this. This is something we have been working on for a while, but have never had in place, or we've always had this policy in place and we're reviewing it.
This is new. These are new. These are both new, right? General Counsel Hoying.
Both new. The gift grants and bequests was taken from really kind of best practices from other districts. Columbus has a policy very similar.
Okay.
And then the crowdfunding policy is a policy that the auditor has recommended that school districts have in place
for the last couple of years. So it's something we really
Yeah.
should have in place.
Yeah,
Both new though.
I think that the only question I had was, I used to be a teacher, worked with many teachers who have used things like Donors Choose.
Mhm.
And I was, it feels like there could be some risk that there's a really good cause and the teacher has requested approval from the principal and just never hears back. And I don't know how to size that risk. Maybe this never happens, and if it never happens, this is a beautiful policy. But like, is there some risk that like a highly motivated teacher who really wants to do something great, and there's a principal of a building with a lot of things going on, which may be way more important than one individual teacher's Donor Choose campaign? You know, does this create like an unnecessary roadblock? Is there, and I would welcome feedback either on, you know, Ben, that risk is vanishingly small, forget about it, or here's why we shouldn't be worried about it, or here's how we could make this different.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, it's obvious it's a potential risk. I would say we don't really know yet. And so part of what this policy allows us to do is create procedures to track these things, right? Because right now we have no method of tracking what's actually happening at the schools, especially ahead of time. And so creating some procedures would give us the data to say like, okay, you know, this school, you know, this teacher submitted 5 requests and hasn't gotten any feedback on it. Now we can dig into that data. But right now we're kind of working without any data at all.
I would add that CFT has been a part of the previous policy meetings and has seen this policy, commented on it. We've made some changes per their request. I would also add that there's some risk both ways. So this attempts to create some standards for what a principal should be looking for in a campaign. We've also had the experience, you know, and I don't think it's you know, where a teacher will go out there and say, you know, I need this because the district won't provide me any fill in the blank. And that's not necessarily, that can be reputationally bad for the school, or even for families. My families can't afford this. You know, that's sort of what a principal, I think, should be looking at in deeming the appropriateness of a campaign. It is a good source of funding. We know that. We know teachers are already using it. We get reports, right, from Donors Choose each month on thousands of dollars that are coming into the district. This is just a way to start to have some standards around it.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense. I'd like to think for just a second. I mean, I'm happy to come back. Thank you.
So I think I'm going to relay the exact same things that I've shared before. Some of them, Board Member Lindy, I was about to say former President Lindy, but Board Member Lindy has shared, having been in this situation where I've used crowdfunding sites before. I think what this is going to do is create an alternate method of people getting money for what they need, because this to me feels like a barrier. I'm not saying it's not a necessary barrier, but I think it feels slightly restrictive, in that if a teacher is in the classroom and they know that they need something, having to go through several gatekeeping methods to get that can just sometimes prove to be inefficient. But if you said CFT has seen it and they're on board, then I don't want to stand in the way of that particular one regarding crowd sourcing. For the 7230 gifts, I do think we need to say that for second paragraph that all gifts, grants, or bequeaths having a value of $250 shall be presented to the board. The superintendent may accept the board, but it still needs to kind of come back to the board for awareness. So I just don't know where that would be. Is that the threshold number that we said was 250 was the IRS reporting number that we didn't? Okay, I wanted to remember how we got there. I don't know if is that we don't have to report that value anywhere? Is that why we're saying we don't have to show that in our reporting if it's under 250?
Yeah, I believe that was some of the discussion.
Lauren, what were you gonna say?
Yeah.
I, 'cause 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 I
Forgive me. So when we did a little more research, essentially the donor requires, in order to make a claim on their taxes for the donation, they need documentation for things greater than 250. So this actually allows us to fulfill the donor's requirement of having that documentation via the board minutes.
Gotcha. And then the other piece was the very next paragraph. It says it will be subject to use by the district as determined by the policies and administrative guidelines applying to all properties, equipment, materials, and funds owned by the board. I think we need to put something in there that specifically states unless it is restricted, because some donors restrict their donations to certain things that they don't want us to do and to use. For instance, if a donor for Hughes says, hey, I'm going to give them $1,000 for the board, for a athletic board, and they go to the proper channels for gifts and grants, we can't again determine that that's going to be what we want to be used from. So I think there just needs to be some level of description here for restricted donations. And then the other piece that I was going to kind of ask about with regard to what would be our accounting to know, like, what do we have to do to the district in totality to say, hey, we got this much in grants? Do we need to report that publicly anywhere? Because it would be public like technically it's a public donation.
So we do, especially in the treasurer's report, you'll see like there's a section for grants and a section for donations every time. So we do report those things out.
Okay, but we don't have to list names or anything like that. I see the grants. I pay attention to the grants, not the donations.
We do list names. And people can ask to be anonymous. So people can ask to make it anonymous, but we usually list the names and the amounts.
Okay.
The other thing, just to answer your question, is for assets that are donated, then they become part of the assets that we track. We tag them, we track them as district assets, and dispose of them when they're no longer useful, those sort of things.
So if a donor says, hey, I want to donate a projector to Hayes Porter, that's kind of restricted because it's to Hayes Porter, it's the projector. But are we saying here that that is going to become the property, and if we close Hayes Porter or whatever, I'm just giving a sparse example, but that we get to control that? Like, I just want to understand, as a donor, I have given things specifically to schools with the specific intention of it being used the way that the teacher and the principal wanted it. I don't want to have ambiguity here where people are feeling like their donations have the ability to move from what their intention was. So that's, if you're telling me that we're all covered, then that's good, but that's what my question is getting at.
So I think Dan,
Yeah, so a proposed addition there, I think that's a good thought, would be restricted grants shall be used consistent with the donor's intent.
Okay.
Right. I mean, legally, the schools don't operate as a separate legal entity from the district, but that doesn't mean that the donor's intent doesn't have to be followed.
Okay.
And so we still get into situations where we've had a bequest to a school that doesn't exist anymore, for example, and we have to then go back to the donor and ask for it to be broadened to, what program might serve the same types of students. So
there's a process.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you. That was all I had.
no, I would say I'm surprised you didn't mention, Dan, in the crowdfunding policy. Yeah, we wrote in, I know Dan added this at the end about earmarking. Where is it? Where's that at? Where's that sentence at? Yeah. Yeah, the second to last paragraph. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the topics we did talk about last time, is that people donate to the school or to a program or to the districts, but not to individuals. Because legally we can't by ethics rules. And so we will, we always try to keep it in accordance with those wishes of the donor. And I think that's a fair thing to add to the grants, or gifts, grants, and bequests policy as well. Are there any other thoughts? Yes.
I could follow up on that anytime, I think. Is it okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I think I'm sometimes good on my feet, sometimes I'm not good on my feet. You had mentioned, Dan, sometimes maybe people putting grants together that either say they don't have something, but they actually could have access to that same thing, or B, maybe cast a school or a community in a light that some would not appreciate. Is that the, I was trying to think of what's the worst thing that has currently happened because we don't have this policy?
I think, well, one, I would start with by saying for now 4 years, the Ohio auditor has said we should have this policy and we don't. So at some point, the auditor is going to say, we need this policy. So that would be primary. Secondly, I think, again, I think this paints in pretty broad strokes the standards that we think should be used. And so the worst thing that has happened, I think, is that there have been times where a principal or the district has questioned a solicitation on Donors Choose or whatever, and there's been nothing for us to go back to say, these are the standards it should follow. Same could be true for a teacher who says, hey, you know, the donors intended for me to use this for my classroom in this way. And this policy says we should allow them to do that. We should earmark those funds that way. So I think it is somewhat protective of both teachers and the district and schools.
Yeah.
If you have a couple thoughts on that, Mark.
Sorry.
I was just going to broaden that a little too, from reviewing the data showing what we have historically received. There are unfortunately items that are not in alignment with things that the school district can accept. So gift cards are something we do see come through, and we know that it violates a lot of other district standards. The other thing that we thought through is how do we ensure that proper curriculum items are coming in? You know, teachers maybe have a really wonderful intention, but and ask for something that doesn't perhaps abide by the curriculum standards, for example, or other items we've seen around technology. So we get these wonderful donations for technology that doesn't coincide with our other technology standards. So things like that as well, just kind of from a nuts and bolts and technical standpoint that don't coincide with the other district standards.
Yeah, it's helpful. I think that the fact that the auditor is telling us we need one of these probably does more work with me than anything else. I have a real desire to support entrepreneurial teachers who want to do good things on the front lines. I think that's just like a good thing to do. I think something that would make, I'm only one board member up here, but something that would make me feel better about the current version is if there was some expectation for how quickly the principal would need to get back to the teacher. And that doesn't need to be tomorrow, you know, but like a principal could in theory sit on this for 3 months and not violate anything. And that makes it hard to be the entrepreneurial teacher that I was imagining. I don't know what that number is because the principal's got a big job and I can imagine more important fish to fry. And I want to be empathic to that also.
And I think to that point, there is a section at the bottom of the first part there that talks about the dollar amount, but I think maybe, Dan, if you can put together maybe some language that says within a reasonable time, something to that language there.
What about promptly?
Yeah,
Promptly review and respond to the.
And that also allows us to have a mechanism for holding the principal accountable.
Right.
Not adhering to the policy.
Yeah, great. You're the brilliant legal minded. That sounds good to you.
Yeah.
To that, this is not what I was going to say, but to me, promptly, timely, all those things are relative because promptly to me might mean 30 days to other people. But again, I think that that's more procedural for the administration to administer. This came up, I remember, because we had gotten into a discussion around school foundations, and I don't see anything in the gifts, grants, and bequeaths or crowdfunding around school foundations and the receipt of money or donations. Now I'm asking that question because I know that there are school foundations. We have many of them that will usurp this policy. So because they will accept it and then they will give it to the school. So the original intention of us going to kind of look at, I remember when I was involved, of us kind of looking at this was to be accountable to what is being received on behalf of the district. While we have the NGO policy that if this becomes cumbersome, people are going to go around it because the best laid intentions, you know, we're trying to protect ourselves, but we have foundations at schools who are collecting money, raising significant amounts of money on behalf of the district. I don't know if we should put something in here to address foundations collecting money and the reporting of foundations for gifts, grants, and bequeats.
General Counsel.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'd say on the gifts policy, I think, and Assistant Treasurer Guston can comment on this too. I think that we intended that to be as consistent as possible with current practice. So the board is already accepting and receiving and gifts as a part of the treasurer's report each month. It was intended to be consistent, not something new.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we started this project, there's basically three buckets, right? There were gifts, there were crowdfunding, and then there were the non-school organizations. And that was like the third set was the last thing we wanted to look at, to take another review that policy as well to make sure they were consistent.
So-
These two areas had kind of nothing, right?
Right. And so I think what I'm saying is the non-school organizations needs to be mentioned in here, just like the crowdfunding policy mentions the gifts ones. And we need to have accountability for those school foundations that we currently don't have accountability for. And I think that it needs to tie into the receipt of money on behalf of the school, to Lauren's point that our school foundations are operating and we don't have a clue of what they're doing. So we talked about, I know Treasurer Wagner and I spent some time talking about maybe doing an all call to find out what schools have foundations, because we don't even have a tight handle on that, and then get their information. They are using our properties and our buildings to raise funds outside of this policy. So all I'm suggesting is that this policy needs to have some reference to school foundations and NGOs having to follow it, because it currently doesn't say that, even though we have a policy, but I think it needs to tie back in for accountability.
Just for quick clarification though, any school foundation is operating outside of districts, outside of the jurisdiction of the district, right? Like they're a separate entity, unless otherwise they're a district foundation, right?
They are always a separate entity.
And so I think the one thing that may be clear about that is just making sure that as they give, that those gifts, even if someone goes around the process, those gifts still need to adhere to the same process that anyone else would give into us, because we have a very limited amount of ability to control how they do it per se, but how they give it to us and how it's utilized within the school. So maybe to your point, if the school is using that as their method of going around on a regular basis, that's something that should be, they still acknowledged and addressed. But, the ability to account for how much money they raise on whatever thing they do is somewhat limited in our ability to do that.
Jim wants to speak, I think.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I would just,
Hey,
Yeah,
Jeff.
I think Jim wants to speak. Sorry.
Yeah, so the gifts policy addresses, it doesn't matter where the money comes from, it's who owns whatever is being gifted. And whether so the independent 501c3s, if they do their fundraising and use it to do something, then they're totally separate organizations with us. But if they're gifting money or equipment to us or whatever is being gifted to the district, it has to go through the treasurer's report as a donation and recorded properly. So we can work on a foundation separate policy, but for the gifts policy, it doesn't matter where it comes from. We still follow the same processes on recording, accepting and recording and tracking. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. I just think we need to mention it.
And I think
That's
we should cross-reference it.
Mhm.
I agree with both Board Member Craig and Moffett. The only other thing I'd add is our control, they are completely separate entities. Our control over non-school organizations really is that we're allowing them to use our reputation, our goodwill, often our brand, often our logo, often our facilities, as you mentioned. That's sort of our control. So if they are, in some ways going off of our message and what we want, that's our control, is to say you can no longer use our logo, our alumni contacts, etc.
So I think the one question I do have is that with the changes and modifications that we kind of talked through, are we as a committee okay with moving forward, given that those changes will be made, or do we want those to still come back here again? Because I know we've been at this for a few months now, and I think it goes after us to back to policy for the policy to approve and then bring to the board officially. So just,
I'm good.
are we good with All right, so I think what we are good with, Dan, if you want to make those necessary changes, reflect the comments, then we will keep it going forward.
Thank you.
Glad to see Jen, also really awkward to see us on the screen.
It's okay, leave it like that. I like it. See ourselves.
Yeah.
My vanity side.
All right, so
Scoot it a little bit.
kind of to back up and go back to the work plan, I think everybody should have a copy of the work plan. It's a draft version still, and this is through the hard work of folks in the treasurer's office, as well as myself and Jen working to kind of merge some of the comments that we received at the last meeting. I want to just highlight a couple of things that we did make changes on, or that I made changes on in putting together the work plan. So one of them was, I actually merged the legislative agenda items to one bullet point. And in part because I think they were saying somewhat of the same exact thing, which is that things that are related to budget that would be a legislative issue would be able to come before us, and I think we can determine how we want them to come before us, whether that's legislative aid, whether that's someone from states to come in, whether that is whoever that would be able to speak to it. I think we will have a few of these type of things, especially when we potentially would look at any additional levies or whatever that might come before us, that we might need someone to come in and be able to explain and address those things, but specifically calling out that we would want just the
Lobbyists.
The lobbyists to come before us. I thought it would be covered in the second bullet point and added additional conversations to that part. We did remove a couple of things that we just as a point of order don't do. So one of the ones though that still remains is highlighted in yellow. And that's the review of proposals for sale, lease, and purchase of real estate. So technically we do that as a full board also. And I know we will bring that forth before us as a, as those things were to come before us, but I don't know that that's something historically we've started here. And so I wanted to get you all's feedback as to whether or not that's something we want to continue to keep on the work plan. Again, we can certainly bring it up as a budget issue, and I think that's a fair thing to keep as a budget issue. Jen, yes.
I just, I highlighted that because we typically do the sale or purchase of property in executive session before it gets into a public meeting. So
Yeah.
but I didn't want to eliminate it without discussion.
Well, and I guess maybe just for my question is that, like, do we bring it up like, all we've been doing here is talking about what we've already done, like how it affected the budget. Right, and so that's just general budget discussion anyway, so.
Right.
So I, when I read that, I was kind of thinking like, we did this in executive session. God bless you.
Thank you.
And so, but I was wondering, was that historically talking about like the cops or any levies, like anything around the sale of property or the purchase of property? Was it speaking about the finances around that, or was it speaking specifically about a property? Because we don't talk about a property, but we do talk about cops in here. We do talk about the things that pertain financially around real estate. So that's what I was wondering, is that when I saw that, I was like, okay, then maybe that's what that means, the finances around real estate.
So honestly, this came from 15 years ago when we started discussing the facility master plan. The
Gotcha.
facilities conversations were done through the finance committee. I think it was even a joint, the name was joint, but it's kind of irrelevant at this point.
I think the only times I've seen it even brought up is when we talk about what assets does the district have. Again, I think that's more of a budget item conversation that would be incorporated in any kind of budget report or any action we would take. So I don't know, that needs to be separately called out.
I think less is more.
All right, so I'm happy to approve that. I want to also know, I updated our goals and guardrails language just to actually reflect that we actually have already passed it. So it continued to use the language that we used as we were drafting them, which would say that the board was working towards. I think we've already started that process. The other thing to pay attention to is the schedule and the calendar, I should say. Again, we had a lot of things on the calendar that were in a certain order from previous years. that also was more connected to stuff that was going on at the time or certain interests. So again, like transportation updates each month was something that was basically on the last work plan agenda. I don't know that we are in a place where we need transportation updates each month. But I want to thank Jen and her team for kind of also thinking through what needs to come before us at certain times in the year. And so like this month, we have some of the certain things on there. The one thing I did have the question on, Jen, is in June, I believe it is.
Okay.
That we will have some things that need to come up from a budget aspect and just making sure that we'll be able to do that on time. To then be able to kick it back to the main board.
Yeah, so we looked at that. I think that we identified when Mike and Kevin we looked at the last board meeting date, and wasn't it before the finance committee?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is.
So yeah, so that was the issue that we need to, because we need to do this appropriations resolutions and do the final budget. So either we move the finance committee meeting or schedule an earlier one in addition to. It's up to you.
So that's the kind of the question for folks, is that the June our budget finance and growth meeting is the 21st. I think the last board meeting is around the 17th or something like that. It was like right before, a week before. And so part of it is the question of, do we want to move up the meeting, which I know also kind of throws off some of the numbers that we would get for other stuff aspects, or do we want to?
I'm sorry, my request would be to have move the board meeting, because June 17th, that's the middle of the month. It's going to be hard for us to finalize final appropriations because we're still paying bills and payroll, right? So even if it's a 10-minute meeting where we just approve the resolutions, I'd like to give our team a little bit more time to finish out a more accurate year-end close.
So that's a conversation, and I'm happy to have that conversation with President Bolden to just see if we can get something scheduled so we can actually do the approval of the appropriation. Are there any thoughts?
So I just want to be clear, because I'm sorry, we've thrown a couple things around and I'm confused. So are we saying to adjust the budget meeting in addition to the board meeting, or keep our meeting on the 21st? Does that give you enough time for you and your team, Jen, if we were to adjust just the business meeting for the board and keep the 21st budget meeting?
I think, yes, that would be better, because we could probably come up with a draft appropriations resolutions for the 21st, and then it'll be tweaked as a few more days go by before if we can get a board meeting, closer to the 30th.
I started a conversation with Board Member Bolden on Wednesday, just to put her alert that we have some conflicts there that are gonna have to get figured out as far as things that come before the budget and finance committee that have to then go before the board. And to Jen's point, I think that having our meeting say where it is, because that also allows the team to really do their full work on the appropriations, makes sense. Now it's a question of, are we able to schedule something that we can get a quorum of the board to at least approve the appropriations, the annual appropriations?
We have the cow on the 12th. Maybe we could, I don't know, because I heard Jen say something about 10 minutes, and I'm thinking, is that for just the budget piece?
I think she's still saying that to fully do the appropriations review, they still need a little bit more of that time all the way to the 21st. And so
Okay,
if we're able to find a date or time after the 21st meeting.
after, okay.
We typically have a board meeting on the last Monday before June 30.
Mhm.
I don't know if it was just a weird way things fell. Because then that gives us time to do the final appropriations and get them over to the Hamilton County Budget Commission. So I would ask if the board meeting could move from the 17th to the 24th.
I think Jen's argument makes great sense. I have some family travel stuff going on that's going to be a mess regardless of which of these dates we pick. So I think we should do the thing that's best for everybody else, and I will make my part work.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts on that issue. And so I'll reach out to President Bolton to see if we can get it moved, or if not, if we can get something that would be scheduled out, so we can do that after that Monday after the 24th. The other things that wanted to highlight, and I think Jen, maybe you can kind of walk through this, or certainly Cody, if you want to walk through this, is that we start identifying other things that might be of parent or good knowledge information for us to have. So we're thinking about, again, some of the projects that are going on, but one of them specifically that's just kind of the idea of the schedule. It's not a confirmed schedule, so it's still something to work through. Is the vendor performance review schedule. So Jen, do you want to speak?
Yeah, so let me just preface this by saying I sent this over to the superintendent to review because it's a lot of like her topics, but she hasn't had a chance to review it yet. So this is very draft. It's brainstorm topics, but what we're trying to do is formalize the whole return on investment, not just focusing on one vendor contract at a time, but like bigger topics. And using this to help educate the board and the public on some of our financial challenges. Like, for example, the first item on that is special education tuition. This is court ordered and it's a lot of money. And but it's just telling people that this is not something we can cut out of the budget when we're looking for reductions, right? But just to kind of educate the public on how expensive some of our tuition is. And then, you know, we've been having a lot of conversations about resource coordinators. So we wanted to, you know, look at, you know, maybe how a different way of allocating it. Mr. Craig, you and I talked about utilities by building, by student, and we already started working on their nurses after the nurse group came to the finance committee a couple months ago. And so Cody's been working really hard with Angie Maddox. Angie, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So anyway, so these are just ideas to spark conversation. But just know that the superintendent hasn't been able to give feedback yet. So I just want to make sure she was comfortable with some of the topics that we came up with.
Yeah, and again, this is part why we are doing this still in the draft form, is that there's still some things we need to finalize and adjust on the schedule, adjust and when we can get folks in. But I think it is a good use of our time. I think the one other thing or a couple other things that have been added. So one is kind of bringing in some of the financial reports and having, you know, whether it's Cincinnati Preschool Promise or ABC or some of the other groups that have worked with us, and they're doing a lot of resource connection up. We've had them in our meetings before, but just really trying to schedule a time for them to come in and present. So again, we better understand both our connection with those particular groups and those folks who are working with us, but also where we can better assign our resources throughout the year, so that we're not coming up in October and trying to figure out what we did or did not do, where we are benefiting or not benefiting, how we connect out. The other thing I think, and Jen, I think maybe you can speak just quickly on the annual state and federal final expenditure reports in October.
Yeah, so you know, our federal grants, and Mike and Ann can talk about this too, but our federal grants, you know, we have to encumber them by June 30 and then pay the bill by September 30 and submit a final expenditure report to the state. And then what comes out of that is carryover rules. So if you didn't spend all your money, some grants allow you to carry money over, some don't. And so we're trying to stay on top of how fast we're spending that money. But we thought it would be a good thing to be transparent about how much we're estimating our carryover early in the season, so that we can start building budgets. Because if we wait until the actual carryover comes, it's January, February, and we only have until June to spend it. So we're trying to be more efficient with that money. So we thought we would start doing an estimate in October, after the end of September. Mike, Nan, you want to add anything to that?
I think you covered it well.
I'm channeling my grants management team.
And again, I think we've done the grants reports in the past, and I think this is just another way of us putting it in front of both our public, but also in front of the board, in some ways, to really thinking about this is part of the budget process that we have to adhere to, but also where we spent, where we got to spend, where we are expecting to spend going forward. Jenna, any else from the work plan that you think would be good to highlight this time?
So we just kind of consolidated all the monthly financial reports into one line so that as we can bring up seasonal things if we want to without having to list it out. I think one thing I forgot to put on here was sometime in March or April, probably March would be a better time, is in when we're in levy season. You know, there's 2 resolutions that we have to do. And so there's conversations about the length of the levy, the size of the levy, you know, all that kind of stuff. And it needs to initiate in finance committee. So I think we should probably add it to the March agenda. And just put if applicable or if in the season or something like that.
Yeah, we can definitely add that onto the March agenda. And we can do, and that's what we can do, like, again, as appropriate, given the what we're looking at or what our options are.
I'll just call it levy planning discussion.
The last thing is on the last sheet, there is the financial transactions requiring board approval. Again, this is where it just lists out all the dates in which it needs to go to the board. So that's why we're also trying to be very cognizant of, as we create the work plan, as we create our agendas, is to make sure that we're getting stuff done early enough that the board can actually then have time to hear it and have time to approve it on time. And as our goal this year, right, then to approve our budget on time, approve everything on time.
Yes, sir.
So,
I'll buy everybody pizza.
by the appropriate manners.
Exactly.
Personally, out of my personal account, yes.
I think we should be buying you pizza, Jen.
Cards to the board. So that's the work plan. Again, we're going to still keep bringing it back till we get the finalized version of it, but I wanted to put it in front of everybody's eyes today so that we can get some more feedback, and then in addition, once we're able to solidify those dates and other things, then we'll have a final work plan that gets approved. Last couple things for old business, preschool promise updates. I know we got a slide up on the updates at the Cal meeting, but Dan, you want to provide a little bit further information on it?
Yeah, sorry. Yes, thanks. And I think the treasurer might want to also. So we have exchanged drafts back and forth. I think we are at a place where the current draft is consistent with the feedback that we got from the board. And we'll be ready to return to you to review. I want to remind you that it's a significantly different arrangement than what we previously had with Preschool Promise. Our first master agreement, Preschool Promise, really served as sort of a conduit of funds. There was a very defined formula that involved an agreed cost of quality preschool, and then a formula that tuition assistance would be a specific amount based on the star rating of the preschool, the days per week that a student attended, the hours per day that a student attended. It was a formulaic sort of arrangement. This is a much more open-ended grant of money to Preschool Promise for the purpose of improving, maintaining quality preschool within our district. Not to say there's no parameters, there are still some of the parameters, but it's a much more open-ended arrangement, and they have much more sort of functional autonomy than I think under our previous arrangement. That is with that in mind, and I think that's the direction we got from the board. This agreement is, I think, close to returning to the board for your consideration. I would let the treasurer especially ask the treasurer especially to address kind of where the parties are on funding and the shared funding.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Dan. So what we agreed to in the years to come in this contract for fiscal year 24, we remember there was a disagreement on what the budget was going to be because they changed the rates. So we just said, okay, we'll stick with fiscal year 24 as it is. Fiscal year 25, we agreed to split based on that ratio that they recommended. So this gets us in a transition to a per pupil concept. Starting with fiscal year 26, we agreed to do a set aside for kind of that administrative cost. I had calculated 2 million for each organization. One of the changes they made in this most recent one was they changed theirs to 2.5 million instead of 2 million. And they added a phrase that said that those values would have an annual 3% growth. What concerns me about that 3% growth is that with the limited, it is a fixed sum levy, so the monies aren't going to go up. That means every year that the set aside goes up, the per pupil value will go down. So that's a concern. The other point I wanted to make, and it's concerning to me, but if this is what the board wants, we just make it happen. But there is no longer a reference to the tuition being allocated based on the family income. The original spirit of the agreement was that to get students who needed it the most a high quality rating so that they would get more financial support than those that were better off economically. So that's no longer the case. The functional autonomy gives me heartburn. I won't lie. It just makes me very nervous. And they do say there that they will abide by all board policies, proper public purpose, our allowable uses policy, and that we're going to send the agreement up to the state auditor for review to make sure that it's all good. There's a language in there that says maximizing the number of children benefit preschool, preserves resources for quality improvement initiatives. Preschool levy funds shall not take the place of existing funds such as Title I, ODE, and ECE funds. But that rule should apply to both organizations. And so they left off whatever they received from ODJFS. And so I wanted just to make sure that both organizations were treated at the same standard. Lastly, the agreement references to quarterly financial reports to each other, except our work plan just went to twice a year. So I'm comfortable with twice a year, but we just need to make the two documents align.
Yeah, and I thank you both for the updates here. I think you're raising some legit things that we have to think about as a board also and make those decisions. Are there thoughts anyone want to communicate at this time? Do a clean first.
Thank you.
We'll go next.
So, Jen, I just want to be really clear, because I'm a little still cloudy. You said what you described, the conditions that you described start in 2026?
The per pupil, switching to a per pupil concept starts in 26. So the model is, there $15 million of revenues a year. We subtract out the set asides. So CPS would get $2 million for administrative special ed support, and CPP would get 2.5 million. So the question becomes, should it be the same for both of us or whatever? But you take that money off first. So then you get left with $10 million to allocate to each organization. We're going to divide it by I think we agreed on the December 31 extract of each enrollment, right? But is regardless, taking into consideration half-time versus full-time, but not the income level. So we would divide it by the number of kids, and then that per pupil gets allocated out to both organizations based on the proportional number of kids. But what they're going to do with that money is they're going to allocate it however they want. So they could, take the top 10 kids. I'm not saying they'll do this. This is the risk. They could take the top 100 kids and pay full tuition, or allocate it all to one center or another. And this Cincinnati Public School Board has no say in that.
Right. I just wanted to, no, I get it. I just wanted to understand when what you described would go into place was for the 2026 school year, right?
Yes.
And then did we have a decision about for next year about the hold of the money that we had we authorized, but we had kind of put on hold for them?
That was this year. That was this year's budget, and we agreed that we would just go with what was requested.
So they got that part or they didn't?
Well,
got
we
the-
haven't signed the agreement yet, but yes, we've agreed verbally that that was gonna, I never took it out of the budget. It was there. Remember the day you voted on the budget, we increased it by X amount of dollars to cover their increase in budget.
Right, right. And then you mentioned the both organizations having the same standard, abiding by board policies. Do we have not a governing agency, but they had formed like a group that was inclusive of yourself, it was inclusive of, yes, does what you all have worked on include the financial working group to be formed or accounted to?
They called it the financial working group, but when it was forming, but now it's called CPP Finance and Audit. And I'm a voting member of that, or my designee.
Yeah, and we
Okay.
included that.
So okay,
Yes.
that's what I was gonna ask,
Yep.
is do we have that included in the?
Yeah.
Okay.
Originally, it was left out of their revision, but I think that was just a mistake. So they added it back.
Okay, that was one of them.
Thanks, Brandon. I wanted to say, just thanks for all the work that's been done on this. And then as a question, we do not have a draft of this yet, right?
That we've sent to the board?
Right.
I don't remember the last draft we've sent, but I believe we're able to send you the current draft now if you want to see where we are.
I
No,
don't
the
need to
short
rush
answer
it.
is no.
I was asking, like, I don't remember reviewing something. Was I supposed to review something
No.
for this meeting? I wanted to make sure I had not missed something.
No,
Great.
Not yet.
Okay.
it's been
Great.
passed back and forth about a half a dozen times between
Yeah.
the CPP administration and our administration, but we have not sent it back to the
I
board
think
yet.
my request would be, whenever it's going to come for board approval.
Yep.
Whether that is first through us and then to the board or to the full board, I'd be agnostic. Could we get it a couple of days in advance?
Oh, of course.
Because I just like to look through it, think about it, figure out if I have any questions ahead of time. Thanks.
And then one or two thoughts, real quick thoughts on it, and first is, again, I want to echo what both of the committee members have said, that there's a lot of work that you all are doing that's really pushing us to pushing the agreement to match it to what the board for CPS and the board for CPP discussed. The one cause of concern that I would have is somewhat echoing to the question of the spirit of what was agreed to and what we would be taking back to folks in a levy form, because we do have to raise this levy again. And there is a question of, the purpose of the original levy was to expand access to preschool, and more specifically quality preschool, through a portion of these funds, right? So 15 million of the full 45 million. And I want to make sure that whatever we end up agreeing to, or whatever we end up pushing out, is something that we can then be able to take back to a voting public for the next levy. Right, because I think one of my concerns before was that we kept saying the word expanding, or we kept saying, like expanding the number, or that idea that comes with expanding the number, which we're not. Like, we don't have funds to do that, we need for 15 million. Just to be quite honest, right, we certainly can expand what the quality of the services we're supposed to receiving, or that type of language, but I think we have to be more realistic in the language that we communicate to the public, because they see the number of students getting access to preschool being this number, and then the next year it's not really increased. That's something that's gonna be a hard sell. And so maybe the conversation needs to be also around how do we, not for the agreement, but how do we long-term put together an idea that makes sense to communicate out for future levies, for all our future resources based on the things that we agreed to in this agreement. So.
I respond to that. Two things to respond. One, thank you. And I think that was a point you've made earlier in these discussions as well. The current agreement would include language that says to ensure that preschool promise funds are being used effectively to improve students' readiness to start kindergarten at CPS. The parties shall agree on a common student assessment mechanism, such as the Ohio KRA, for students who attend both CPS preschools and CPP funded community providers. So I think we intended that as something to be able to have some data to show that this is working. The second thing I'd add is, and this is something for the board to think about too, it has been important to the Preschool Promise folks to include, as much as we're comfortable with, some continuing language. They are funded largely by these funds. And so the board would, yeah. So if the board would decide not to say renew the levy, that would be devastating to the organization. So that being said, on the other side, the idea is the notion I've always had is that it's sort of the board's decision whether or not to put a levy on the ballot is not something that belongs to anybody else. It is the board's decision, not anyone else's. So there is some language that they've proposed, which you'll see, which says CPS expects to seek public approval of a 5 or 10-year renewal levy in November 2025. CPS will include CPP in the language of the renewal levy in a manner consistent with those existing preschool levies. So that would be like in the past, we've done a shared vision resolution, things like that. In any event, they are trying to push us to say we will continue with this levy and we'll continue working with Preschool Promise. Just wanted to make sure you were aware of that as well.
And again, I think that's been consistent stance from them as well. And I don't know that there's any great inclination to not do it, but I think we do need to be comfortable and sure that whatever's in official language within the agreement is something that if we make changes or if we decide to not pursue it for whatever reason, if we would, didn't see any reason we would, but that we are in alignment to even do so. Thank you for giving us the update on Preschool Promise. Treasurer, I'll throw it back to you for update on the treasurer's reports or the treasury report updates.
Well, this was for you all to give us feedback on, was there content in the board meeting treasurer's report that you was missing that you would want to see, or is there content in there that you don't really want to see anymore? Like, for example, there's a section on board information. It's contracts that are approved that are under the $50,000 like my authority level. Is that important to you to see on a regular basis?
Thanks, Dan. If you're asking, go ahead, Ben, you can go first.
I was gonna say it's not independently important to me.
So for me, I don't think I just think in this time of budget crisis, I'd like to be aware, not necessarily so that for action, but for awareness. So for me, this particular board member, yes, continue to list it. I think.
So Jen, the two thoughts that I have is I think some of the things that are on there that were things that are just more informational stuff from us. Maybe there's a schedule of how we do it per se than necessarily whether it's need to be in each of those. And again, maybe that might be more so during budget season than necessarily summer, where those things may not necessarily need to be, we don't have a couple meetings going in summer, so.
I was thinking maybe monthly that we could do,
yeah,
all the under 50s or something like that. And just so you know that we've spent some time working on the consistency of fonts and pages and stuff like that. And so I think you'll see a much improved, once we're finishing it, then we're going to send it over to the financial tech team to design the reports right out of Cognos. So they're not extracts and then they're having to manipulate Excel spreadsheets. So I'm hoping the professionalism is improved quite a bit.
Yeah. And I think that's the only other feedback I would give, Jen, is that there's things that, certainly that need to be in each cycle for us to have to approve. Absolutely continue to include those. For the ones that are maybe, yes, we can do a culmination of those things throughout the month. It may just make it also easier for you all and having to put those together. Because if you're doing, even again, if you're doing revisions on some of those things, that may not always be the best use of time either. Whereas if we could just get it once a month, full listing of that, we can acknowledge that at the board meeting or something to that effect, even though we're doing these by consent agenda now. So unless it's something that we have to pull off, it's maybe easier for us for that purposes.
Okay. All right, we'll keep working on it, and you'll see things change each month or each board meeting, I believe.
Awesome. I love improvements, so let's keep it going. All right, well, to our monthly financials. I know this is President Bolden's favorite time of the board meeting. We'll kick it over to Treasury staff there.
Yeah, so just as a quick introduction, we're working on improving these as well, and so you're gonna see quite a few new slides that are, talk about trends in cash. And so I'll just kick it over to Mike to get it started and we'll go from there.
Yeah, I'm gonna actually kick it over to Mr. Ashley. The one thing I will say as we go through this, right, exactly. The one thing I will say as we go through this, all of the new slides have a kind of a little new button in the top left corner. So you can see what we've added. And obviously we welcome any feedback. So as you kind of see these things, for the first time, please give us feedback on whether you like them, whether they make sense, if there's a little more detail you want to see. And we'll go from there.
Okay, so I'm gonna have Rob skip to slide 3. So kind of give a summary at the very beginning, and you can look at those, but we'll talk through those as we go. 3 is just the header, cash and investments. So the next 3 slides relate to cash and investments, and you'll notice each of these have the new button on them. One of the things we tried to do with these is to give some perspective of our overall portfolio, not just the general fund, where we tend to, focus on the general fund. So the slide that is up there now is a breakdown of our cash and investment balances by institution or by investment type. So the blue slice is the operating cash net of reconciling items. So that's our U.S. bank general banking account, some other bank accounts for like self-insurance and those kind of things I think are in there as well. The orange slice is what's currently in Star Ohio investments, which we are getting a pretty good return on those right now. A lot of that is driven from the tax anticipation notes that were issued in December that are in that category currently. The yellow slice is debt related, including sinking funds. So as we've talked about before, there's at least 3 of our debt issues have mandatory sinking funds, where instead of paying principal payments, we're setting aside those principal amounts for essentially to pay off the entire debt at the end. One of them, for instance, is $3 million. So over the course of the life of that debt, it will accumulate to $3 million and then will be paid. So that $35 million represents that, as well as other funds set aside for debt payments. The gray slice, I think about my colors here. The gray slice is things that are managed by Red Tree Investments primarily. And their long-term investments, such as certificates of deposit, U.S. agencies and instrumental, or however you say that, U.S. Treasury notes and obligations. So the total of all that, so that's all of our funds, is $224 million. So just to give you perspective on that. The next slide. This is showing simply the U.S. Bank operating account. So this isn't all of our cash. It isn't even all of our liquid cash, because again, we have that money sitting in Star Ohio. But we just kind of wanted to give you some perspective of this account. We're obviously trying to make sure we have enough funds in there to cover payroll and to cover AP runs and that kind of thing. So we've been working on a procedure of where we want to keep this. One of the things you'll see here, and you'll see in some of the other slides, is how we have peaks and valleys. Our peaks typically come in July and around February when we get those tax settlements, either property tax advances or settlements from the county. So those are kind of our high marks. And then over the next 6 months, as we expend, payroll and those type of things, it will come down. We do receive our ODE funding, the foundation funding, on a consistent monthly basis, 2 payments a month. Grant funding is a little more cyclical, depending on when we request reimbursements. The next slide gives a breakdown by fund category, if you will. So you'll see the general funds allocation of cash is $116 million at the end of January. Debt service is the $57 million. Just some other categories there. Also, there's a hyperlink here. that's available that kind of gives a little more detail about the funds. But just to kind of give you, so internal service funds are things that we put employee remittances in. We manage our health benefits costs through those funds. Student dining has a little bit of a balance, so we show them separately. State and federal grants at this point have a negative, and the reason is because we've made expenditures and we're waiting on reimbursement from ODE. But we did kind of want to highlight those. With the facilities funds, the capital improvement funds, there's about 3.6 million set aside for the classroom facilities and maintenance repair fund and just some other permanent improvement. Trust funds, 1.9 million, and then all other 10 million. So again, tying back to that 224 million total. So that completes the cash and investment part. So unless you have questions, I'll go on to the general fund part. Okay, great. So the next slide, this is the one that you have seen. The thing we kind of highlighted here is if we did not have the tax anticipation balances, it would have been about 41 million. So you can see our fund balance within the general fund would have been significantly less. I will note that in the last couple of weeks, we've received for the general fund, 154 million in property tax advances for the next settlement. So we've gotten a big chunk of that already in February.
So can I just jump in for a second?
Certainly.
So the difference is last year we got our the taxes from the Hamilton County in January, and this year we didn't get them. They didn't even make them due until February 5th because they were delayed in getting their bills out. So of course our collections are later. So we're always subject to the timeliness of the county and the city when they make their payments.
That's a good point.
Yep.
Thank you. The next slide is showing cash balance related to the general fund. Again, you'll see that trend where the general fund's cash balance is always going to be higher in that July and February timeframe. Again, in the green is the current year, the bold line is the current year, and you see the bump for the tax anticipation notes there in December.
Kevin, can I make another note here? Sorry.
Certainly. No, you're good.
I want to point out that, see, the yellow line is 2021, 2023. Or I'm sorry, the blue line is 2021-22. So we ended June 30th, 22 with $116 million. So that became our beginning cash for the next year. So we started 2023 with $116 million and we ended the year with 69 million. And so this is a conversation, I feel like a broken record, but this is a conversation we keep having with the forecast and the budget that we've dwindling our cash reserves. So I just wanted to keep repeating that point.
And just another point, these data points are at the end of the month. So that's why we have the end of June and then we have the end of July. So we may actually add a data point to have July 1st so that it does cycle from the beginning to the end. The next slide is one that you typically see as far as a 3-year revenue comparison. Again, the tax anticipation notes revenue will be offset by the property tax revenue. But so at this point, we were at 51% of our total budgeted revenue, excluding that. And again, as Jen mentioned, the timing between January and February is kind of what's making that more obvious. Next slide is revenue by source. Again, you can see the key ones I'll mention here are the green from FY23 to FY24. The state revenue is about $10.5 million higher. The property tax revenue, again, is lower because of that timing issue. The next slide is a new one related to revenue. Again, kind of showing for the past 3 years, again, you see the same trend, but I think it does kind of reinforce, as Jen mentioned, where we sit at the end of the year versus the beginning of the year. I think that it's important to see that. Next slide is just how the revenue grows from the end of July to the end of June. And we, again, are showing the effects of the tax anticipation note. Next slide, now move on to expenditures. One of the anomalies we'll see here in a couple months in March, we'll repay the tax anticipation note. And we're actually going to do an appropriation amendment for the board to approve actually in a couple weeks that will allow for repayment of that $75 million. So along with some other small grant changes will be there as well. Next slide. This was just kind of a high level expenditure by source. Taking the blue as salary and benefits, green is everything else, purchase services, supplies and materials, all of those things rolled together. So if looking at the previous slice, we were about 53% of the budget at the end of January, which is consistent with the prior year. Next slide. This is looking at total expenditures for that 3-year period. Green is the current year. Some of those peaks and valleys are related to months that have 3 payrolls. So certainly you'll see an additional payroll in those months. And that's going to fluctuate. 1 year, the 3 payrolls is in September. 1 year, it's in October. And so that's why that one's not quite as consistent. And also debt payments are going to be in there as well. Transfers, I should say transfers related to debt payments. Next slide, again, is just showing our expenditure level is pretty much consistent with the prior years at this point. The next slide is what we were calling unallocated, unencumbered, uncommitted. What we're really just trying to show here is for the general fund, 4.3% of the total working budget, the total working budget being $626 million. Of that, $14 million is not set aside, or it is going to be posted as transfers related to debt. $205 million is the budget that's allocated for remaining salaries and benefits. And then the $27 million would be the remainder. That is not, it's allocated in essence, but it's not encumbered. The departments have not chosen to encumber those funds yet. So we want to see that number go down because the later they encumber it, the less likely they'll be able to spend it. Sir.
It says general fund. Does that include title?
No, this is just general.
It's just general fund. Okay.
There is a similar, when we get back to ESSER, we're doing a similar one for ESSER.
Okay. Because I know when we have our title, we don't always see, encumbered. We don't always see it spent. So I was wondering, I didn't realize that it was so high. Not that it's high, but that it was such a large slice for general fund as well.
Yeah. Just compared to last year, it was at 5% of the budget, 5.2, this year it's 4.3, so pretty similar.
Okay.
And the next slide is just kind of a summary slide we included, like it kind of summarizes everything together, showing what the total revenues were for the month. So another thing I'll point out, the most of the slides are fiscal year to date. In terms of revenue, expenditures, and cash balance. This one is pulling out specifically for the month, the total revenues, total expenditures, beginning cash balance and ending cash balance just for January. And we highlighted here there, there's always going to be some accounting adjustments. And as we went into January, there was an adjustment between other revenues and state share of local property taxes. So that's why that shows up there. And then quickly, I'll do the preschool slides and then I'll finish mine. The thing I just want to point out here is this year versus last year, the number of students who received some sort of tuition assistance was 1,007. In the prior year, it was 996. So it's still continuing to trend up. The year before was 872. And then the next slide shows kind of a balance sheet for preschool expansion. Again, showing property tax revenue. They've received, half of their property tax revenue, which is expected. Showing the United Way payments to date, et cetera.
before we leave this slide, I just wanted to
Yeah.
point out, again, this is part of the reason why we're having the CPP conversation. Is that the budgeted amounts for this year is in excess of it's almost $3+ million, almost $4 million in excess of what the initial plan was under the levy. So I think that's, again, long-term, the conversation point that we need to figure out with regards to the next levy as to what's the appropriate budget line, but it's good to hear that we're kind of getting to some form of agreement that will bring us back in line with what we are actually giving money to each year.
Yes, we're actually using previous year unspent carryover funds.
Continue.
All right, Rob, if you want to go ahead and go to the grant slides. So go 2 ahead. Thank you, sir. So this is our kind of high level grant summary. We've been doing this for a few months now. So we're through month 7 of 15. We talk about, the 15-month grant cycle. You got, 12 months to do the work and another 3 to pay for it. Spending goal is about 40%. You can see there, a little over half our grants are making the spending goal. Total spent or encumbered right at 49%. The thing you'll see as we go through these slides is we're going to start adding in the carryover amounts. So we have those carryover amounts from ODE. For the most part, to us, you'll start to see those. They are not budgeted yet completely, and we've been working on that. That was really a big focus this week, is getting direction on how to budget those. So just prayer as we go. So key activities. The big one that I think our grants team is excited about, right, is the on-site monitoring visits from the Ohio Department of Education or Ohio Department of Education and Workforce. So those are the first week in March. I think they're visiting, what'd you say, 22 schools? Yeah, so they're going to come out, they're going to do site visits at 22 schools, plus a bunch of other stuff. So
Mike, can I interject?
it's a big event for us, obviously. Next slide.
Can I
Here's
interject?
kind of the bar. Go, sure, Jen.
Can you go back, Rob? So first of all, did you introduce Nan to everybody?
She introduced herself at the beginning, but
Okay. So she's our new grant. She took Taya's place, if you remember Taya. But Nan, how many people are on your team?
We have 5 altogether.
So we have 5 people that manage 35 or 37 grants plus all the ESSER grants, which makes it over 42, right? So it's a small and mighty team. Okay, thank you.
thanks, Jen. If you'll go to the next slide, Rob. So this is kind of the line chart we show every month. You can see we are well ahead of last year. So I think that's credit to not only the grants team, the small and mighty grants team, but also a lot of the budget owners and folks for getting their money in. So that's a good sign. Now we just have to keep that trend going, right? The key is once you get it going the right direction, to keep it going. Next slide, please. So this is the title summary. So all the time. Oh, wait, can you go back, Rob? So if anyone's wondering where the big grant sheet is, right, the one we used to hand out, in the slide deck, if you click through the link, it is attached in the slide deck and as a footnotes, but it's still there, up to date, has a lot of good detail in it, but we didn't print it out this time. All right, Latrice, the Lorax thanks me, right? So if you go to the next slide, Rob, the title summary. So these are all the title grants. A lot of this you've seen. Again, we have 2 columns now for percent spent or encumbered current budget, and then with carryover. Obviously, the carryover numbers are lower. We also have the total carryovers there in the right-hand column. Couple of things. These numbers do include the non-public share. So for each of the titles, there is a share that goes to our non-public partners that we don't touch. We do kind of manage their spend and help them with it, but it's not money the district can use. Go
What
ahead.
percentage of that? So that we could see like how much is actually going on our kids versus how much is going out? Is there like a 30%?
I mean, it varies by grant. It's the same, they are our kids in those schools, and so it's a per pupil allocation. We can start breaking that out. I mean, that's kind of how we approach it from a budgeting standpoint. But since they are still our children,
Okay.
it's relevant, but I can start breaking it out. In the
So
future.
give me an example of like, they're not they're ours, but they're not ours, or they're not in our
So the
buildings.
children like living within our district, but choosing to go to Catholic schools
Okay.
or, you know, a lot of other types of charter school, well, not charter schools, but private schools.
Okay,
But they still receive some mostly supplemental services from us.
okay. We have to, that comes out of title and we have to pay for
They
that,
get
right?
basically a piece of our allocation,
Okay,
based on the same kind of criteria we use for receiving funds.
okay. I just want that to be very clear to the
Yes.
public, and I don't think it is, and that's the only reason why I'm asking for that differentiation, so that we can demonstrate that we may receive that amount of money, but this percentage is going to our kids in our buildings, and this percentage is going out. I think it was very informative for the public to see that around transportation, so I'm thinking with regard to title might be super helpful.
We'll start breaking.
Thank you.
I was gonna say, this is very similar to our transportation discussion, yes. So there are the numbers. Dr. Moffat just wanted to do an update on Title IV. So you remember we had that conversation. So we're up to a third of the spend. So that a lot of that was reclassifying salaries, but I know we talked about that a couple meetings ago and wanted to bring that back. So, and we met with that group, I think, last Friday or so, and had another meeting to work on their spending plan. So if you're curious about the grants, what they're for, there's a click through on this one. And we created like a working doc that has more of explanation of the type of grants. You know, so because I know we throw a lot of abbreviations in there to fit everything in the slides, you know, and a lot of numbers. So we wanted to give some more detail for folks who are interested. All right, next slide, Rob. We'll switch to ESSER. This is the big ESSER block grant. You can see we're spending away. You know, those two blocks tend to get closer and closer together every month, which is what we anticipate, right? So goal is to have it spin out. And then if you go to the next slide, Rob, this is the summary. I think we mentioned a couple times that we say ESSER, but it's not a one thing. There are multiple sub grants inside that. All the ones that are grayed out are closed at this point. So we've closed and spent those out. The other ones that are kind of bold and not grayed are still in play. And you can see where we're spending here. I think it's Treasurer Wagner updated us at the budget workshop. We have a little more time to spend stuff out. So we got that guidance. And then finally, if you want to go to the next slide, Rob, the pie chart. This is the same sort of thing that Kevin chose in general fund. This is the ESSER pie chart for this year. So you can see kind of where we're at. There is some unencumbered at this point. I think we're in the process of doing another deep dive into where we're at, looking through all the different parts to see what's going to spend out, what's trending. We're looking at, you know, salary, vacancy, savings, and other things. I'm actually going to let Nan do the next couple slides. So if you want to go.
All right, we wanted to just talk a little bit about grant opportunities, and there's basically been kind of a lot of questions and general chatter out in the district about possible opportunities under the climate provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act of the federal government, which are basically all green initiatives. So we just kind of wanted to get ahead of that and get some basic facts out there so people would be more informed. And so this is a program not really like our typical grants through ODEW. These programs are running through two main agencies, the Environmental Protection Agency, which is providing grants, and then the IRS is providing tax credits in the year following the activity. And so those are the two primary lead agencies in control of these funds, of the ones that would affect school districts. In both cases, the maximum amount of reimbursement is up to 50%, but usually much lower. There's kind of like bonus points. So most of those are about 30% matching type grants, more than full funding of initiatives. Both of the two groups focus on two main areas, which is, you know, pollution, energy saving, solar panels, those kind of creating and using energy. And then the second piece of again, both agencies focus on clean vehicles versus traditional gas-powered vehicles. In both cases, under the vehicles, they're basically just kind of like smaller tax credits that are not a huge amount of the actual purchase of the vehicle or the amount of increase of the cost of a clean vehicle versus a traditional vehicle. And so we just wanted to get it out there that these things are available, but to get people to be more informed on how they're gonna work and what possibilities really exist.
Rob, you go to the next slide. Yeah.
So they're kind of parallel goals of the two programs, but they're administered very differently, depending on the lead agency. So, any questions on that?
On that, and I'll be brief. I know that the city was trying to partner with us. Is this what this is for? Because they have a or a sustainability department that was wanting to partner with our district around energy. It could be energy, but it was other sustainability initiatives. Is that what this is, or is this something separate?
Not specifically, the board has passed, goals of becoming more green and trying to implement green opportunities whenever we can. And so I think because of this kind of appearing at the same time as that,
Okay.
a lot of people are kind of, wanting to know, well, is this money available for us to start initiating some of these
Sure,
goals? And I mean, it could be in alignment with them, but it's not that I've heard of or worked on myself personally yet.
Okay.
And we don't have actual, applications available or anything yet, because this is just kind of being discussed, but this is a framework that they provided us.
And then there's some opportunities for green schoolyard money. Again, I guess my question initially, and I will send it to you because I've been working with the city on that for our district as part of that with the Civic Garden Center. And we've got schools that get money for green schoolyards. But I'm wondering, is that part of what you're talking about for EPA? Okay,
No,
so
this
this
is
is just those two particular programs. Okay.
And the biggest, this is an opportunity, but the downside is, again, it's a small contribution to things that have additional costs because of their green
Gotcha.
focus. So there would be a significant, general fund or some other type of match that we would have to come up with anything that we wanted to initiate.
I got you.
So
Okay.
I want people to be aware of that it's not like title that we just pay for the whole project.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
So may I interject, please? So there's a lot of conversation in the policy committee around the sustainability resolution they're going to put forth. And there's been a lot of conversations about all these different funding opportunities. I think we need to centralize and formalize and track, because I think everybody has a different understanding and so they're like confusion about what the city's doing versus what this grant is. And I'm getting a little bit concerned that things are being oversold. And so I need to find a way to kind of collect everything. That's why I asked Nan to start putting new grant opportunities on these slides so that we can make sure that we have one pathway, I guess, to discuss multiple grant opportunities, if that makes sense.
It does.
Oversold, Treasurer Wagner?
Well-
Surely not.
The first time I heard a presentation about solar panels, it was like the sun and the moon in the sky. And I'm like, yeah, we got to front that money first. We don't have that kind of cash flow. So.
Alrighty, well, keep us going on target here, because I'm trying to beat Ms. Bolton and not have
Yeah.
go through the next couple slides there.
Yeah.
This is a grant, again, just to keep everybody informed as new grants are released from whatever source. This is one that was just released in January from the Ohio Attorney's General Office for school safety. And we have received this grant in the last 3 years and did some good work with cameras and various things in all the schools. And so we are already in the application process. This is a grant that always gets announced late and then comes in late, and we kind of got to rush to spend it. But they have renewed this grant. This is first come, first serve money from the districts. It's, so it's very competitive. So we are hoping to get, a good allocation of this and get our requests in. So I just want to let you aware that hopefully we've got more things coming our way to help accomplish some.
Any way we can get more state funds, I support and encourage.
100%.
That's it for me.
All right. Any questions on grants? Okay. All right. Quickly, 2 slides, Rob. We have 3 new CRAs, and you guys should have gotten a piece of paper with them too, but just throw them out there. 3 new CRAs that'll be for board approval on the 26th. Couple mixed usage, 1 apartment building. You can see the numbers. Not really, I don't know, not a whole lot exciting there in any way, shape, or form, so. Okay.
know there's one more slide that just has a highlight for, I think it may come into our conversation a little later on, but,
Yeah, I think we kind of discussed that in the work plan.
Yeah.
But we left it here for Cody in case he has.
anything else you want to share?
Nothing additional to add. I think Jim pretty much covered it. Schedule, we agree on that with the superintendent that will start beginning these processes, and just excited for the opportunity to show and look and take a deep dive into this. I just want to say thank you for the opportunity, and look forward to working with it.
I want to, again, thank the team for also, because we've added a lot more colorfulness to some of the slides, but also allowing us to have some graphic representations that explains some of the things. Sometimes we see it on a chart. Yeah, we understand it in a chart. Then we see it on a graph and it looks totally different to us in our minds, right? And so it's just it's helpful to have those graphic representations to explain where we're going, see the track we've been doing, and kind of keep us on track there. Anything else, Treasurer Wagner, for the monthly financials?
No, thank you.
All righty. I know it's already been shared with the board members, the annual comprehensive financial report. I think shared out to a few others here today. But just, Jen, if you want to talk really quickly about
Sure.
now what it's called. See, acronyms should have really fun ways to say them. This does it now.
I know, and we still call it the CAFR because it's so easy to say. But the ACFR is in alphabetical order. That's how I have to remember it. But this is published once a year, and it includes clean audit, the award for our financial reporting. We just got the new plaque today. So, but I just want to caution everybody when you're reading through it. So it goes through all our financial data, and then there's a huge statistical section in the back, which is very informative. I highly recommend people to look at that stuff. But this report is a modified accrual basis. So we report on a cash basis because we operate on a cash basis. So we always have this debate with certain people around the difference between what's called fund balance and what's called cash balance. And so fund balance includes all of our property receivables that are coming, and in addition to our cash, but you can't you're not going to sell your buildings and your furniture to help pay for payroll and transportation, right? So just caution everybody to not get confused between those two terms, because it makes it look like we have a lot more money than we do. But Kevin, I just want to give kudos to Kevin because he organizes all this data and he works with the company that produces it. And so I just give him kudos because he does an awesome job.
Yeah, Kevin. So we're all about positive reinforcement.
And we did have a clean audit this year, so yay.
That's worth it. That's worth it.
And again,
Congratulations.
a lot of hard work contributed to a lot of folks in the district doing their parts, but also the strong team that we have here that's been working on these things each year. So I'm really happy to hear we continue to be audit problem free. All right. So let's tackle quality improvement.
Yeah. So I started my career 40 years ago in corporate America. And as part of that was when the whole quality improvement circle started. And we were doing all this Deming work and whatever. And so when I came to the district, that was my initial role, was to help get education started with the quality improvement processes. But when the superintendent, Mitchell, was the deputy, she went to a children's hospital, formalized their version of these tools. And so several people in the organization have gone to these classes, including Mike and Cody's in the class right now. And so as a part of that, we've created quality improvement teams within the Treasurer's Department to improve our efficiencies. And Mike's going to go through a little presentation, but I just wanted to kind of give that as a improvement. And so we're making great progress. So we wanted to celebrate and inform everybody on what we're accomplishing. So Mike, you want to do it?
Oh, thank you, Jen. Just for the record, Jen started her corporate career at age 10. Just if you're doing the math. So, Rob, if you go to the next slide. So very excited about this, you guys. Super excited. We've been doing this QI stuff for a while. It's really great. So why are we kind of doing this? The big one is in our strategic plan. Strategy 5 under resource equity, it specifically calls out, and I have it highlighted there. CPS will refine process in the treasurer's office and the purchasing department. And these QI teams are the way we're doing that. You want to hit the next slide, Rob? So why are we doing QI? 3 big reasons. One, obviously to maximize efficiencies in processes that either the treasurer's office owns or that we are deeply involved in, but most of these are cross-functional. We're obviously always looking to improve financial stewardship. Most of these problems are big recurring problems. A lot of them, honestly, have been things that have been issues as long as I've worked here. And we've just never quite got around to solving them. So the way to do that's a different approach. The other thing we're trying to do is build capacity, right, in solving big problems. So if we can tackle, say, PNC compliance this year as a problem, we're building capacity in leaders so that we can tackle the next problem that comes up, right? So it's two sides to that. What model are we using? The model we're using is the improvement guide. So it's called the Model for Improvement. As Jen mentioned, a lot of us have went through class with Children's Hospital. They do some really nice classes to try to bring people along. They're also building in Cincinnati a community of people who have the same training, which is pretty cool. So we can work with other similar agencies. Like we kind of had this meeting a couple weeks ago, and I was part of it. It's all these people have a hand in kids' lives. It's Children's Hospital. It's us, obviously, but it's also like the health department was there. Cincinnati Works was there, Job and Family Services. And so you get a lot of people using the same model. It's really easy to cross-pollinate. Kind of the 3 big questions we're always asking: what are we trying to accomplish? How will we know our changes and improvement? Because not all changes are improvements. And then what changes can we make to do those improvements? Next slide, Rob. All right. So, why are we presenting this information? Obviously, we want to let the board and the public know some of these financial processes. It's a different level of detail. We obviously want to kind of explain, hey, a lot of these things are cross-functional. I know Treasurer's Office, we get a lot of the criticism of processes that don't always start with us. They just kind of end with us. So it's kind of like, we're kind of like New Orleans. So we get everything that comes down the Mississippi River shows up in our water system. And so it's important to kind of people to see that big picture. We want to highlight and celebrate our team's hard work and the collaborative efforts. We want to present financial data from a different lens. This is going to be more transactional. We just went through these kind of 30,000-foot reports. This is going to be more on the ground. And we also want to allow some of our emerging leaders opportunities for growth. Next slide, Rob. So what you'll see, we're going to starting next month, we're going to have team leaders come in and present their projects. So you'll get to hear from a lot of different voices. We kind of have a standard template, that we use in our monthly meetings. So you'll kind of see that. What you'll see, though, you'll see cross-functional teams, of people from all over the OR district. You'll see, process modeling and process mapping, identification of process failures. We'll see folks' theory of improvement. So saying, okay, understanding the system, how do we think we can make it better? And that's on a document called a key driver diagram. You'll see data. So you'll see their run charts. So they'll what they call run charts to see how the system's changing over time. So we can say, hey, if we're making these changes, is it making things better for people? And then obviously what their observations and their learnings are. And so last slide, just quickly, these are all the active teams. I'm not going to read them all. We have pretty much a team for each work team in the treasurer's office, as well as the purchasing department. And then from there, we grabbed people from all over CPS, from school secretaries to principals to leaders in the central office to folks in Iowa Street to help us out with these processes.
I want to, thank you for supplying this information. I think it's something that's been going on and that we knew a little bit about, but we don't know as much as we can. But I also think one of the things the treasurer and I talked about with this is that bringing this information to the fold to show what we're doing to improve how the district functions is a great way also to communicate to the public that we are striving to consistently be good stewards of the dollars that are given to us, right? And that we're not taking for granted the trust that they put into us to ensure that our students are getting the resources that they're allocating and the quality education, but also that we're using those funds appropriately, great way, that we're looking at ways to be more efficient as we go through this budget process, especially that's a real concern. And so I want to thank you all for kind of keeping that on our agenda for the next year or so to keep telling us more of the things we're doing to improve. I think there's also an alignment in a lot of ways, some of the conversations that Lauren and I've had with regards to just making sure that folks know all the different ways we are trying to correct things to make sure that we are keeping ourselves on track. So, any questions, thoughts? Anything else I want to share? Ben?
I just really love the QI work that you all have done. I remember Jen sharing examples from negative vacancies in the past as an example of impact you all have had. And just in a previous part of my career, spent some time in the quality department. And I think the work you all do here is great. Thank you.
Thank you.
I actually
Thank
do
you.
want-
Oh,
I
I'm
do
sorry.
want to- I apologize. I'm slightly distracted because we're longer than I thought we were going to be. So I apologize for that. But I do want to validate and let you know that I appreciate the work. A lot of the changes, you've heard me complain, you've heard me ask a lot of questions, and it may come from, I don't want to hear her mouth, but I do appreciate the fact that you put in a lot of work. It's been some teamwork, but it's all to be more efficient and help our district be a little bit more visible in how to the community and how we are being great stewards of money, which is all of our responsibility. So I really want to say to you too, Lauren, because I've been on you too. I really do appreciate it. I may not say it enough, and I hope that I'm saying it enough right now, that I do appreciate the work that you all are doing, especially that adding the new button, like new information. That's just great because I always go through the slides and I'm like, okay, what do I really need to see? And it's like you heard me telepathically say, like, I just go to what's new. So I do look at your work. I don't always say it. So thank you very much for all that you do. Thanks, Jen. I saw you over there too. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So just two things. One is our philosophy is for every dollar that we can save in the treasurer's office, it's a dollar that can go back into the classroom to support students. And so we take this work very seriously. We try very hard to be good stewards. And for Mr. Lindy's comment, that project was actually highlighted by Dr. Rob Kahn at a Children's Hospital conference on improvement. And so he came and spent a half a day with us, and each one of our teams presented to him what we were doing. And so it's very exciting work. And so yeah, we'll keep celebrating every month. We'll bring one team.
Because I'm committed to saying this in every public meeting I'm in for the next 6 months. Not only did CPS have the second highest math improvement in the country among the 44 largest urban school districts in the country post-COVID, but we also are highlighted at national conferences with Children's Hospital for the quality improvement work that you all have done. So thank you.
I again love positive reinforcements. So when we do great things, we should celebrate. So the last couple things on the agenda, the budget update, I don't know necessarily, Jen, if we have anything additional update from what the discussion we had the Cal meeting. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to our discussion today.
So just to say that we are they are trying to finalize all the student projections, and so that they can feed them to us. We can run them through now that we know that the staffing formulas aren't going to change. We can run them through and start working on the school budgets, and we'll just keep you updated as we have data to share.
And so again, in the future, we'll kind of keep that on the agenda as we go through the budget process. I think it's good for us to kind of talk through some of these things, even though we will be talking about them probably at every board meeting as well, for business meetings. The last thing we added on to new business is just to highlight some of the things we're going to talk about in our future meetings. I think it's a good way to prepare us as a committee on what's going to be coming forward in the next couple of months. And so Jen, I think we have specific, but
yeah, let me get back to the work plan so we can go over what's happening in March. So in the March agenda, in addition to the normal stuff, the district insurance, Mr. Hoying will give us an update on our annual insurance report. Kevin Ashley will give us an investment update. We'll have our first QI team come report, and Cody will come do his first KPI report.
Okay.
We got a loaded agenda. next month, and I will do my best to get us through all of that and under the amount of time we took today. But I think we had some really good topics and really important things to discuss and give feedback on. So are there any folks online who wanted to share any thoughts? Rob? That is always great also. Well, if there are no further business before us today, I do call our meeting adjourned.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.